Okay, if we look at the golden text, I love the word portion. Thou art my portion, O Lord. I looked up portion. It's an allotment, and it's part of a whole allocated to or belonging to one person or to a person. And there's so much struggle in the Adam dream to get one's portion, to get what belongs to him, even at the distress of other people. And this just puts the idea of portion right in its place. God is our portion, and we all have all that is God. Let's see, Jeremiah. His verses are from a man, a prophet, whose name, Jeremiah, means Lord is Jehovah. So this is the God of Jehovah, the God called Jehovah. And I looked up some facts on Jeremiah because I always associate him with lamentation. He received the call to prophesy when he was very young. But prophets then were also political advisors to the king. And he went through a great deal of misery as trying to keep the kings holding to the better part in politics as guided by God. He opposed the Egyptian party. He wanted them to stay with the Chaldeans. He was accused of treason. The people sought to put him to death. But he has the reputation that though he was very timid, apparently, sensitive, at times hopeless and despondent and complaining, but he never shirked his duty. And when duty called to say what God had said to him, he was like a defensed city and an iron pillar. One or two other things before I look at what he says in this lesson. He was resolved. He was always resolved. He was unflinching from duty. He was fearless when he had to face the whole world, as he was dispirited and proved and prone to murmuring when he was alone with God. He considered himself a failure, but he was not. Society at the time was totally disorganized. No man trusted another man. All fight over portions, for example. But when he saw this, he lamented, but he stuck to his guns. And, of course, he wrote Lamentation. So I looked at what he's quoted from. The Lord is the true God. He is the living God and an everlasting King. So despite the response of society to him, he clung to the fact that there's only one God. He's the living God and the everlasting King. And then he says also in this passage, every man is brutish in his knowledge. Every founder is confounded by the graven image. And that, of course, is the belief of life and intelligence in matter. They are the vanity and the work of errors. So it was very strong. Then, in sort of in contrast or in success in understanding God, we have 1 John. And therein, beloved, it begins, beloved. Believe not every spirit, but try the spirits, whether they are of God. Because many false prophets are going out into the world. And prophets there I see as the Adam dream and all that's included in it. We are of God. No man hath seen God at any time, but hereby we know that we dwell in him, and he in us, because he hath given us of his Spirit. So that when you get into the New Testament, the sense of already accomplished spiritual existence is much stronger than in the Old Testament. So God blessed Jeremiah for all he tried to do. But I think that's a very interesting contrast, or it's a success in the latter part to dispel the matter dream, because we are already of God, not straighten up and you'll be of God. But we are already of God. So I like that combination. Okay, next, the word dust appears 3 different times, and I think that's just wonderful to have in the lesson on matter. Originally, the word Adam was described as red clay, being made of red clay. But herein, everything within the Adam dream is dust. And it's used to indicate death. Wilt thou bring me unto dust? Or death, again, is asked in it. And of course, at funeral services, sometimes, dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return, or something like that. But the insubstantiality of dust is just a wonderful word to use in this subject on matter. And it appears again in that same citation 543. If man is material and originates in an egg, who shall say that he is not primarily dust? And also in that section, there's a passage, and it's in Romans 7, and it says, because the creature itself also shall be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. And the bondage of corruption, that word corruption, is the corrupting of the body in death. So we'll be delivered from the bondage of death into the glorious liberty of the children of God. So I thought that was very important in the opening to do that. Okay, next. I'm jumping around in the lesson today because there are just certain ones I want to give background on. Okay. The next is Jeremiah. We did Deuteronomy. The fact that there are passages from Deuteronomy. So I did some study on Deuteronomy. Let's see. In section 1, Deuteronomy is mentioned. Know therefore this day, and consider it in thine heart, that the Lord, he is God in heaven above, and upon the earth beneath. There is none else. Very strong statement that there is only God in heaven and upon earth. And Deuteronomy is a wonderful book. It means repetition of the law. Are you aware of what I'm telling you? Because I won't give it if you think that they all know it. It's the reformation of the legislation of the previous books for a special purpose, with such changes and revisions as are fitting to a people about to leave the wilderness and enter upon their permanent home. Deuteronomy is a collection of orations and songs of Moses, constituting his farewell to the people of Israel. and it brought about a great reformation, the discovery of it. It was supposed to be discovered by Hilkiah in the 8th year of the reign of Josiah, which produced the most sudden reformation in all history. So it has power. It's of such power and influence that it's listed as one of the great poems or literary traditions that the world has ever produced. Let's see. One biblical scholar says in his book on Jerusalem that what these reformations did was not to create a body of fresh and novel laws. Deuteronomy is a living and divine book because, like every other religious reformation in which God's Spirit may be felt, it is at once loyal to the essential truth revealed in the past, while receptive of fresh directions from the living God. The great lessons of the spirituality and unity of God, the love of God, and of man as the sum of the commandments are most impressively taught. So I think Deuteronomy should appear in our lesson, quite often, in fact, because it holds the great lessons of the spirituality and unity of God, the love of God, and of man as the sum of the commandments are most impressively taught. So I thought that was interesting that such a strong statement comes from a book that led to great reformation. And the strong statement is essentially, if you look at it from the subject of matter, that there is only God. The Lord God, He is in heaven above and upon the earth beneath. There is none else. And that's that. That's why I talked about Deuteronomy, because I think it fits so well. God is, this isn't, and that's that. So, okay, let's see what else. Well, we had the interesting man, Samson, in the lesson. We don't often have Samson. And I thought it was most interesting that we had him. So I did a little research on Samson. And we're told that he appears in Judges, that Samson is derived from the Hebrew word for son and means sunny or sun hero. He was born on the borders of Judah, not in Judah itself, 14 miles west of Jerusalem. Even before his birth, his mission was announced. He was to be one who should begin to save Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. And to this end, he was consecrated to God. We know that. He took the Nazirite vow, which he broke in the lesson that we had, and that was to dedicate himself to God and His directions. And the outward showing of it was not cutting his hair. There were Nazirites who were for all their lives Nazirites, and there were some that were appointed for only a given period of time. His outstanding qualities were, one, great strength, which we know about, that his strength was just the strength of many men. And this article that I use as historical background mentions some of the great things that see the slaying of a lion with his hands, the slaying of 30 Philistines, the breaking of the cords with which his own people bound him to deliver him to his enemies, the slaying of 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of an ass, and the carrying away of the gates of Gaza. Now that is mentioned in our lesson. carrying away these huge gates. And a second special endowment of Samson was his sense of humor. He was impulsive, practical, looking, puns, and riddles he used also. Wit and humor are natural to some men and can be made efficient weapons for good, is what this biblical background offers. Now he is mentioned in Hebrews 11:32, and his name is enrolled among the worthies of the Jewish church, including Abraham, David, and Samuel, even though he fell from grace. But I think the rest of the section in which Samson appears speaks about strength. There is no king save by the multitude and host. A mighty man is not delivered by much strength. Seek the Lord and his strength. He giveth power to the faint, and to them that have no might he increases strength. Even the youths shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. There is no power but of God. So the whole section is about strength and power from God, not from muscle, not from body. The end of Samson, of course, is a recognition of his yielding to the idea of body, of strength, of muscle rather than from God. And then finally returning to that and managing to destroy a whole lot of Philistines in the temple. But I thought it was interesting. I didn't know Samson was listed also with other Jewish worthies in Hebrews 11:32, with Abraham and David and Samuel, and also him. So we can learn lessons from him. And I think the lesson has done a good job then in having section 3, it is, I think. Can deity be almighty if another mighty and self-creative cause exists and always and sways mankind? And then she delivers a very obedience to truth gives man power and strength. Submission to error superinduces loss of power, which is exactly the story of Samson. So I thought that was interesting to find him among the worthies, and his being a lesson to us that Mrs. Eddy certainly enlarges upon. Okay, I think that's about all that I wanted to say about the lesson. It was mostly, did I do Jeremiah? Okay, so that is about it. Later on, the Lord is Jehovah, right? Oh, it's interesting. I hope so. I didn't know whether that was of any help, and I need to know if they prefer just a commentary on what the lesson says rather than just background. So I gave a lot of background this time. In citation 13, to measure intellectual capacity by the size of the brain, strength by the exercise of muscle, is to subjugate intelligence, to make mind mortal, and to place the so-called mind at the mercy of material organization and non-intelligent matter. That exercise of muscle as a basis of health is an overwhelming belief. As sporting in the joy of God's love, we can certainly use our bodies, but to exercise muscle because we think it's the basis of strength is something we have to recognize is very much abroad in the land. I guess it always has been. But we're certainly warned about it this time. Job, did I talk about Job? Okay, that's the last one I want to talk about then. Page 63. There's some rough edges here on my preparation, and I'm sorry about that. Okay. Talking about section 5, citation 19 from Job. There is a spirit in man, and the inspiration of the Almighty giveth them understanding. The background on Job is that it is considered by many Bible scholars the greatest poem in the world's great literature. Worldwide, it handles the worldwide problem of the mystery of suffering in a world governed by a good or the good God. And this was a very great problem in the classical world also. They wrote tragedies about, for example, a moral man who nevertheless has to suffer terribly in this life. It was called the Oedipus cycle. But the end of Job is where he says, I have heard of God, but now I see him with my eyes. His thought was so spiritualized that he yielded entirely to God. And he even followed God's direction to forgive those neighbors and friends who had been of no great help to him in trying to bear his burden. But he was finally rewarded tremendously because of his spiritualized thought, his total submission to the only power, God. And all things work together for good to those who love the Lord, I think is what Job's story tells us. In the classical world, it's the man Oedipus that in 3 different plays the Job story was told. He was a good and moral man, a good king in every way, and yet he committed sin. He did not mean to commit sin, but he did commit sin. And ultimately, in the 3rd play, he is taken up and received by the gods in this beautiful, beautiful scene of man's oneness with God and man as not a sinner, because he establishes clearly he had not sinned, and the gods received him. And it has tremendous parallels in its poetry and its scenes with the story of Job. So there's been a searching for a long time among thinkers as to why there seems to be suffering to good men. And of course, it's Jesus who made clear that God is the only power. Only with mine eyes shall I behold and see the reward of the wicked. And it was our spiritual understanding of God that the suffering is removed with the joy of the knowledge of God. So anyway, that's what I have to say.